Welcome to the CEO Bros Podcast, After Hours, with Brian Baldoff, co-founded, grew, and sold VHT Studios. Brad Baldoff, CEO and co-founder of By Your Side Autism Therapy Services. Matt Croak, the consummate entertainer, jack of all trades, and serves as our host.
It's late night. It's after hours. We know it's CEO Bros after hours.
Now it's
after hours. We are now the morning. After hours.
So good morning. Good morning to
good morning.
CEO Bros.
This is the first podcast this early.
It's after hours, but it's technically after hours. It's morning.
But we can still drink, right?
You can still drink. I've got a little screwdriver. And we won't talk about the big scratch on Matt's face because
Let's
that
get that
happened.
out of the way.
That happened last night, I would imagine.
You know, there's a theme with the scratch on my face.
Is that when that server scratched your face because you were? Probably not.
So with the scratch and with some technical difficulties we had last night to make us into the morning, I think today's a great time to talk about disasters. Because last night did not go as planned.
Went off the rails.
We got to get this episode out. It is morning. So I think disasters is a great topic for today.
It's a fantastic.
Who wants to start?
Right. Well, I think when we were kicking this around over drinks last night, I think we were just talking about how
We had an epiphany last night.
Yeah, I think we were talking about just how Brian and I and our respective companies have experienced, you could call them disasters, you can call them trouble strikes, but a lot of times it's stuff that happens that was not in the playbook. You had no idea it was coming. And in many cases, it's very damaging for the business, and it's how you react and what you do. And so we just thought, let's talk about this on a podcast.
Yeah, let's share some stories. I actually made a list of mine, and there's 14 that came to mind.
Well, you'd consider disasters. These though to be like disasters where the business is going to take a major hit.
Yeah. Gonna take a hit.
I think I've only heard about 3 or 4 of these. So do you want to just write?
Well, yeah. I mean, I could do a couple episodes. I did my homework. I kind of feel like a cockroach. Like I could survive anything because I've survived.
I'd say so. If you had that many, I mean, to the point where you're saying the business financially is going to take a major hit, or could stop the business altogether, kind of thing. Or?
Yeah. Well, and there's different types. You know, you and I talked about this. There's the big macro, the economy. You know, I had 3 once in a lifetime economic disasters that we had to deal with. And then there's
which are name the 3. The 3 was 9/11.
.com implosion
.com.
in 2000. I mean, that
Right.
destroyed the economy. I don't know if any, how old people are, but that was a major disaster.
Can you give
your paper is really bugging me.
Sorry.
The sound from the paper is big. And I'm sure
when Brian talks,
I'm sure
Amber's going to be able
you
to edit
ASMR fans, Brian is going to
leave that in
By the way,
there.
can you tell us what that is? Because you said it on a prior podcast. You said something about
ASMR is very popular. It's the where people do that kind of sound, or they'll open up, like my daughter who's autistic will literally listen to people open up a candy, the wrapper, and really close to the microphone. And when you talk like this, it's ASMR. And it's huge on the internet. Like, people, it calms them down. It's a big thing. Probably for people, with sensory. It's really popular for people with sensory.
So Brian's paper would be anti-ASMR to me.
He would be like this. So I'm going to talk about disasters. That would be ASMR.
Okay. All right.
So I have
Am I
heard
saying that right? ASMR. Yeah. Okay.
Very good.
So I've heard of that, and I've actually heard of the opposite. There's a syndrome where people are agitated. I mean, to the point of rage, based on a certain. So look at Brian's like, yeah, Brian's voice throws me into a rage.
The paper was starting to
The
get
paper, bag of chips opening, kind of like scratching nails on a chalkboard, but everyday sounds.
I was just kidding. I just thought it was kind of amusing that you actually have a list of all the potential disasters.
Well, I take this podcast very seriously and do my homework. I'm not saying you guys don't, but
I
I
see
haven't
that.
seen any paperwork.
No, but just by the sheer number
There are
of
so many
things.
things happening right now. So wait, do you
sheer
want us to
number
bring
of things.
paperwork? Do you want us to bring paperwork?
No,
I bring
I'm just
paperwork.
saying.
Yeah, he makes it
Yeah.
sound like you don't think
That's
it's
fine. I'll bring
a
paperwork.
prepared PowerPoint.
Tune
I've
in
got
for those of you watching on YouTube. Tune in. I will have paperwork next
All
time.
right.
I've got prepared PowerPoints.
bring
But
my
let's
receipts.
get back to Trouble Strike.
Can we get?
Right.
Can we get to? So for
Oh,
those
so-
who are, let's the .com. Don't go. Just give a couple sentences. When you said it was a big deal. So for those people who don't remember those days, what happened on the .com bust? Or
Right. So the whole economy was being fueled by .com startups. It was the beginning of the internet, Netscape. It started the rampage. And then all of a sudden, one day it just collapsed and stock market collapsed 30, 40%. Fortunes were wiped out. Companies were wiped out.
Because what the investors realized there's no profits, that this is all just in theory great, but they're starting to get worried that where's the actual money coming from?
Yeah, the hype had exceeded the reality. It outstripped, the actual implementation and benefit from the internet, and that's what happens. I mean, you think
Overvalued.
yeah, overvalued, and then it's like a domino effect. Once somebody pulls out, everybody realizes, holy crap, we have been paying too much, 20 times, 30 times, 40 times, whatever.
And where was your business at that point? How far along?
We
was your
were a
business?
startup.com. So we were definitely a .com. We
In
were
the first 2
promoting
years of-
ourselves in an internet business. We were in the first year. We had limited funding. We've talked about this before. We had a runway of about 1 year. So, we definitely would have run out of money, or, if everything really collapsed and the internet was just a fad, we would have disappeared. And there was people saying that, like, oh, this was all just a fad. This isn't going to take off.
The whole .com, all the businesses.
Yeah,
in
because it
No
was,
phones for those who, again, who are younger.
Yeah, it
there were
was-
no
it
phones
was-
to accompany the internet. It was all on your computer.
It was early. It's very similar, and I've mentioned this before, and I'd love to do an episode on it, to what you're seeing with AI today. There's people who understand that AI is going to change everything about how we live, not just work, but your day-to-day life. And there's other people who are saying, oh, it's a fad. It's like, whatever.
The VHS
It's-
or the beta tapes or whatever.
Yeah,
CD,
something that had a lot of hype and went away.
8 tracks.
So anyway, that was a potential planet killer, type of asteroid hit. 2007 was actually the worst for VHT Studios because that was right in the real estate. Like the real estate industry imploded because of the mortgage issues. Again, people overhyping, overvaluing something. And once that bottom piece came out, the whole thing collapsed. The real estate industry shut down for.
And I
And
think we're on this-
people need to see that. Watch the movie Big Short.
Yeah,
and
it's a
if I
big
may-
Short.
And
everybody.
Margin Call. Have you seen Margin Call?
Margin Call
I
too.
really
Another
love
good
Margin
one.
Call.
Yeah.
Those scenes are fantastic.
Two great movies
Yeah,
to watch
that's
if
a
you want to
must.
see what happened
Big
in the
Short,
real estate crisis.
Margin Call.
Hello? I need you guys to come back up here.
Wait a second.
Just trust me, okay? I need you guys back here now.
Wait a minute, what am I looking at?
This figure here.
Whoa, is that
It gets ugly in a hurry.
is that figure right?
Looks pretty right to me. There are $8 trillion of paper around the world relying on that equation.
Well, we were wrong.
No, you mean you were wrong. Sir, if those assets decrease by just 25%, that loss would be greater than the current market capitalization of this entire company. How long would it take to clear that from our books?
You cannot be doing what you're thinking of doing.
Sell it all today.
You're selling something that you know has no value.
So that we may survive. There are 3 ways to make a living in this business. Be first, be smarter, or cheat.
Look at these people wandering around with absolutely no idea what's about to happen.
Yeah, and it's crazy, I think we'll go off on a lot of tangents here, but when you were in it and you were living it, you could tell something was not right. Especially if you're a little older and you'd been through things before. Because I was telling people, I'm like, something's crazy about the interest rates and the way the money is moving around, and people are paying me to take out a mortgage. Like, that's upside down. That doesn't make sense. Unfortunately, I was too young to realize, like, okay, you can either benefit by this or be crushed by this. now in hindsight, I realize, okay, when those flags go off, you got to think, hey, this is one of those situations where there's going to be winners and losers. How do I get on the winners side of things? And then, the third was COVID. I mean, that another once in a lifetime planet killer type of event. But we also had a lot of other smaller disasters along the way.
You mentioned 9/11. How did that impact you?
Well, it did. That's why that was a smaller impact on the business. It was a huge impact for the world and the United States and everything, but it didn't impact our business as much as the real estate market collapsing or the internet economy collapsing. And we had, the story I'll share when we get around to it, I think that had the biggest impact on me was we had a major client go bankrupt. And so that's one of the stories I'll use today.
Well, but, you want to jump into it? I mean, instead of teasing the story, you want to, or
well,
you want
to talk about disasters. We
had nothing go wrong in 14 years. No. Actually, we had our share of things go wrong. And I would say, Brian, you touched on there's the kind of the macroeconomic, bigger ticket, affects the world, affects the economy, those type of disasters. Then there's industry related disasters or industry related things that kind of could derail the business. And then there's personal disasters, something that could happen in your own personal life or something that you have to deal with in a way that could impact how it affects the business. I had a disaster, or let's call it a disaster, or something that troublesome to deal with in all three aspects. The macroeconomic side, COVID was a big deal for us. We actually had to shut down. We had to prove that we were an essential business. I'm speaking of By Your Side Autism Therapy Services, which I'm the CEO of today. One that just happened to us in 2024, just literally in the last year, we were hit by the Change Healthcare ransomware attack, where 190 million people were impacted because their personal health information was compromised. And what happened was Change Healthcare had to shut down their network, which is essentially the processing center for sending out and receiving claims payments. And so we rely very heavily, because we're a service business, we rely very heavily on claims being sent in for payment and then payment coming out in X amount of time. Just a lot of small healthcare practices, a lot of independent doctors. Everybody relies, many healthcare practices rely on Change Healthcare. And in February of 2024, they got hit by a ransomware attack and everything came to a screeching halt. Luckily, we have a fantastic billing team at By Your Side. They literally, overnight flipped to going paper billing.
Paper and pen.
Very manual, very intensive. And it took them literally 2 or 3 months of just grinding it out. Extremely archaic process, everything being done via paper. And
so how do they know to do it? Because if you have a generation that hasn't been through a disaster, we used to do things on pen and paper. That's how we started. But if you never did that, I'm always curious. If all of a sudden today Google Maps disappeared, I'm not sure my kids would know how to get anywhere.
Right.
Well,
it is not a knock on my kids. They've just never seen a paper map. They've never had to pull over on the side of the road.
All these angry faces. No, I mean, look, we'll talk about what we should do, what you should do if you're running your own business, whether it's a tiny, small startup or you're running a department of a bigger company, or you're fortunate to be a CEO of a more larger company. You're going to run into these disasters. And then there's how you handle it, your reaction to it. But I would say that, in multiple disasters are coming off the rails. I mean, in each case, I don't know about you, but it's a very, very unsettling experience, because you literally let your mind wander as to now what are all the things that could possibly go wrong. And the first thing you think about is my business going to go under from this? Because you let your mind race and wander, like what's going to happen. You know?
When you're so focused on your plan before that, I mean, you wake up that morning or that week, Monday or whatever, thinking these are the things I got to do this week. This is, or what's important. And then all of a sudden, none of that's important anymore. And you've got to totally change focus, and not just yourself, but you've got to change the whole organization and say, hey, today, we got to do this, or this week or this month, we've got to completely shift gears. And if you don't have a flexible organization, that's difficult.
Or you're not flexible.
Or you're not.
If you're like, oh, this is the way we do things, and we're just going to kind of persevere. We're just going to run our way right through this and kind of hopefully it goes away or ignore it. You can't do that. I mean,
hope and pray is not a good strategy.
Well, when you say you can't do
Doesn't
that,
hurt, but
and maybe we'll get into it later. When you say you can't do that, what are the tips to not? Because they're coming. There's nothing you can do about them. So is it you just have to be flexible? Or what are some skills that they need to not be unflexible?
Well, I think first off, when a disaster strikes or something is imminent that's happening, I think the first thing you need to do is you basically need to pause and evaluate. Brian and I were joking about, like, you have to take action. And I'm like, yeah, I agree. We got to take action.
Brian said you have to take action, and then you're starting up. We got to pause.
But I think Brian would understand where I'm coming from.
Right.
I
think we're both saying the same thing.
You got to pause. When I say pause, I'm not talking weeks or months. I'm talking about pause. Like, okay, don't just impulsively go and do something without thinking, having a plan.
I would say you have to understand what the problem is. You can't solve the problem until you know what it is. So you have to clearly define, okay, what happened to us today or this week, and what's the implication? So I feel like that's what that's
what I was getting at. So you have to pause. You have to evaluate actually what's happening and what is going to be the effect on the business. Because a lot of people are very, very impulsive in how they have to go after getting something fixed or worked. It's like, okay, we got to go do this. It's, well, hang on a second. That may not even be the issue here. We got to figure out, like, what's going to be impacted by this actually, and what do we do about it? So I think Brian and I are on the same page as it relates to that. When I'm saying
that would be my act fast is pull my management team together immediately, set the agenda that says, okay, we've got to identify what exactly is the problem, what's the impact on the business, what's our communication plan this morning to let everyone know that, hey, there's a problem. Hey, we're working on it. Here's what you need to do.
And that's it. So I think, the first step would be, pause, evaluate. And then the other thing too, I think that's kind of underrated is just how calmly you need to handle the entire situation. Because many people, if you don't know it, whatever you're exuding, your personality that you're exuding, it's going to resonate. So if you are flying around with your, chicken without a head, and just, you don't have your bearings, and you are not being very measured in your approach. And let's just say you're more, running and gunning, and
hair's on fire. Oh, this is terrible.
Hair's on fire, which I've lost a few.
Sorry for that reference.
Then I would say that, that'll resonate. That'll resonate in the office. And I actually tell my managers that just on everyday situations, if you come in, you're in a joyful mood, the environment's going to be joyful. If you're coming in and it's very chaotic, the environment's going to be chaotic. So it's also about how you handle that particular situation. As devastating as it is, whether it's going off the rails and getting scratched by an animal last night on the way home. We won't go into that, but
undescribed animal.
Whatever the situation may be, how you approach it is critical. I mean, wouldn't you?
Yeah. Quickly, I was on a flight to Buffalo in a rocky flight, and me and my friend had to calm down the stewardess. We were hoping it'd be the other way around. She's like, we should not be in the air. We shouldn't even take it off. We're like, no, it's going to be okay. I'm not kidding you, because we landed and took off again because it was so windy and such a snowstorm. And we're like, really would prefer if you were calming us down
Yeah,
because
the
you
one-
should be leading because we're in the back seat and she was sitting in your back just complaining.
Well, she wasn't taking any of that because you were calling her a stewardess instead of a flight
Oh,
attendant.
flight attendant. Oh, very
Yes.
well done. Yes, boy, it tells you how long I've been on a plane.
Hey,
Well done.
that could have
Yes.
been part of the problem,
Yes.
right?
The problem. Yes.
She doesn't want to have anything to do with
Yes,
you. No,
you're
I'm
right.
just kidding.
Yeah, you're right. You're correct. It's been a long time.
I'm just kidding.
I think, leadership in general, we've talked about this and we'll continue to talk about it. That's a key piece of it is you have to put on the face to the organization that you want them to put on to their teams and the clients of, calm, collected, we're going to be clear and concise. We're going to be transparent about this and we're going to solve the problem. Like, it's one of my favorite movies is The Martian. And he says that all the time.
I have not seen that. I should.
What?
I know. I
Nor
have
have
not.
I.
Oh my gosh.
Maybe you're
All
gonna
right.
show us a 10-minute
Stop
clip. and then-
recording. Let's go watch the movie and come back
Oh,
so my
no.
reference makes sense.
Everything's going to go south on you. Everything's going to go south, and you're going to say, this is it. This is how I end. Now, you can either accept that, or you can get to work. That's all it is. You just begin. You do the math. You solve one problem, then you solve the next one, and then the next. And if you solve enough problems, you get to come home.
I've seen it.
Oh, good.
Amber's
Thank you,
seen it.
Amber. Isn't
Amber-
it great? He says, work the problem.
Amber would.
Work the problem. You take whatever the first and most important thing is, do that. Then you do the next thing. Then you do
That
the
makes
next
sense.
thing. Then you do the next
Wait,
thing.
because I know about the movie. So who's he? The guy stranded or
The guy
Mission Control?
stranded. Yeah.
So you do know
Mark
that.
Wahlberg.
On
Matt Damon.
Mars.
What was that, Amber? Who is it?
Stranded on Mars.
Stranded on Mars. Okay.
Yeah. He's stranded on Mars and he's got to somehow live so that he could be rescued. Like, what's the first thing you do on Mars? He's like, got to figure out oxygen, got to figure out how I'm going to get water,
I'm
got to
gonna watch
figure out
it
how I'm
now.
going to get sustenance. And he deals with all kinds of problems. Like at one point, his little hut that he built for himself gets blown down by a windstorm and it's all, it's like, okay, forget it. This is over. But he starts over again. All right, I got to do this. I got to do that. It's a great movie.
I would agree, though. One of the things that Brian and I would concur on this is that, okay, so you've evaluated, you've digested what's going on, but now you have to act quickly. You don't have the time or the luxury of hoping that, think of the analogy as you're on the coast and you see this vicious storm coming in and everybody's indicating hurricane's going to hit and you're like, it's going to miss us. It's like, no, it's going to hit. And so when it hits, you better prepare it. So execute your plan and do it fast. So whatever you've determined has to happen, you better start moving on it quickly, because those that wait, you're gonna get tripped up pretty badly, and it could be so damaging it's unrecoverable. So I would say that there's been disasters that have hit our business. I'll give one example where I'm not going to go into the particular. I will say there was in the healthcare space. We get paid by the insurance providers, and one of our key insurance providers overnight, which was a key provider of ours, key payer, I should say, indicated that they were going to cut the reimbursement rates by a very large margin. And if they went through with it in the path they were talking about, our business goes underwater like immediately.
You are exclusively insurance-based revenue. That's how you get your.
Yes. So if they change this isn't like certain consumers saying we're not going to come to your business. This is one of our biggest payers saying we're not going to pay you at that rate no longer, at a rate that's even close to what you've been paid, which changes everything. The entire dynamic of how we are paying our employees and how we're funding the business has changed overnight.
Because you're not
in a letter that I receive in the mail, and you're like, what the hell is this? And
because you're not a startup at this point. Like
We're not a
you're
startup.
You've got multiple centers, multiple employees, more than multiple.
we're an operational business with several hundred employees, with several hundred clients, and we get thrown this absolute atom bomb just overnight in a letter that says this is what's happening. You don't have the time to be like, okay, because it says it's going to go into effect in X days from now, X months from now. So you now are against the clock of how are you going to maneuver through that in order to survive. And you can't sit around and cry tears of like, oh, this is just horrible. I can't believe this is happening to us. It's like, it's happening. Prepare.
Quick question. So were you the only one to find out that day, or was this like a public announcement and all your employees came in and knew, holy shit, this is a...
No, we found out probably about a week before everybody else because the department within the company received notice from the payer. So nobody knew what was going to happen.
Right.
But it right away wasn't like, okay, well, let's see if this goes away in a few weeks. It's like, no, they've already made their decision.
And not a 2-year ramp, by the way. It was months.
It was like months. We're going to change the entire payment structure of how you have basically built your business model, and it's coming in a few months. And so it became like, we're going to get the key people together to discuss this. We're going to figure out what changes we have to make. It resulted in jobs getting cut. It resulted in
I believe your first RIF, correct? Wasn't that
first reduction in force that we've ever had to go through? For anybody that's heard the term RIF, it's a reduction in force. It's not something you want to do when you're a growing company. Obviously, there's employees that don't have the whole backstory to what's going on. I mean, that's a whole nother discussion we can get into, where employees jump to conclusions as to what is actually happening. And you're like trying to deal with a disaster while communicating at the same time, not knowing what the final result is yet. And you have to balance all of that. So,
and I know difficult real quick for you, because typically with turnover at this point, it's either underperforming employees. This was some employees that you really cared for that were doing great, but because of this, so a very challenging time for you.
Yeah, it was. There was a lot of employees that we actually had to let go of, that we had to exit from the company, that were good performing employees that we had no choice. Our rates were being cut, and therefore we don't have the revenue. If you don't have the revenue, you can't pay the expense. And it was really a hurtful thing, because it's your company. It's you take everything very personally, or everything really matters a lot to you. And at that point we had to let go of people that we would not have let go of.
That was actually one of my biggest learnings from financial crises, disasters. Like I mentioned, the 2007, 2008 real estate collapse. You know, I'm just naturally an optimist. Everything to me is, okay, this is going to get better. We can weather the storm. We're pretty strong. But our outside advisors, so our board, our investors, really drove it home with me. Like, you can't do that with a business. Like, you have to assume the worst and you have to move fast. We've seen these types of things before. This is not going to be resolved in a week or a month or a quarter or even a year. You have to make cuts now. You cannot continue spending cash into a losing market.
That's right.
And ultimately it leads to, like Brad said, a reduction and parting ways with people who don't understand why, nothing's changed in the company. I've been doing my job, but you have to make those cuts quickly, which again, being an optimist, I was like, no, we can get through this. We're strong. Let's put it off a week or a month or whatever. Every week, every month that you go spending money, the problem's just going to get bigger.
Well, and Brian, I'd say for your employees that could be out there listening to you, is that you're going to do everything you possibly can
to cut other expenses.
Everything
first.
you possibly can to say, I do not want to touch someone's livelihood. Somebody that actually has to be exited from the company for something like this is a very serious decision for a CEO, a president, a board to do, because you're talking about somebody's livelihood. Somebody pays their bills. Somebody's paying their rent or their mortgage. They're depending on the job. So I take it very seriously. I know Brian does. You have to, if you're running a company, is that in all instances, you're going to think of what are all the things we can do before we do that. That's why this was such a disaster for us, because it happened so quickly. Yeah. There was limited, and in the case of our and buyer side, payroll is one of the three biggest expenses in the company.
Sure.
So if they're coming after, a reimbursement rate structure, there's not much you can do with your rents. I attempted to do that, by the way. I went back
that's
to
the
all
first
my
thing you do is
landlords.
go back to the
Went to all my
landlord and
landlords
say,
and
"Hey."
said, "Hey, you guys got to pony up too." And they're like, "I don't know about that." So because they
You definitely want to share the pain with your vendors and partners as quickly as
Everybody's-
possible.
everybody's
this
gotta
affects
share.
our whole ecosystem.
calling in favors to get access to extra money to be able to do this, so I can fend off having to make those decisions as long as possible. But
That's a really great tip. And how do vendors typically react? Do they know how business works? They go, okay, this is one of those times, because that's a great idea. First thing, get to all your vendors and say, you got to feel the pain with us.
Some do, some don't.
Yeah.
Like we've had, I mentioned we probably had 10 banks over 20 years. Some of them helpful, some of them not at all. But this is when you really tell,
sorry.
like up front, when things are good and you have money, everybody's a great partner. It's when things are difficult that you find out.
you got a lot
who's
of money. I think
who's
you're
a good-
cool to hang with.
Right,
It's like
yeah.
all of a sudden
we
you
can
don't
do
have
that
money.
for you.
You're not cool to
You're
hang
not
with.
as much fun as you used to be.
No, it's not. Yeah, so that's something I can think. Those are the things that stick with you too. I mean, I'm just thinking back on those events when they happened, and that was one where.
Well, so just quickly, ours. Me thinking, oh, this will be done in a year. We've got enough money. We can make it through. It went for 5 years.
Wow.
Before we actually came out on the other end. But we had made cuts quickly. And we actually had to make them twice, which is really painful. It's another lesson I learned, which is
do it all at one time.
Do it all at one time. Don't be chintzy up front. Don't try to okay, well, let's just cut as little as we possibly can and see where we're at in a year. Because that second set of cuts then really shatters everybody's confidence. Like, okay, this guy doesn't know what he's doing.
And when's the third cut coming and the fourth cut coming? Because this guy just keeps cutting and we have no idea when it's going to end. Which is, if you can come out and be like, look, this is going to be very painful. This is going to hurt everyone. We believe after we do this that we think we're going to be okay. I mean, and that's why it goes back to communication, being transparent. Like, hey guys, this is what's happening. Here's why it's happening. This is what we attempted to do. This is what we're doing. And you may not agree with me. You may not. You may think that there's other paths. I'm being as transparent as I possibly can with you, and this is what we're doing. And I think people appreciate that. They may not necessarily at the end of the day feel like I feel great about all this, but at least you shared with them what's going on. I try to do that as much as possible because I think it does help people understand what you're actually going through, the decisions that have to be made.
So both of these are real examples, not hypothetical. What was the response to when you were transparent and told your employees what was going on? They were. Do you remember what the mindset was?
Well, for me, ours was initial shock, initial anger, initial frustration. But I think because we were transparent, much like we were with COVID, and said, here's what we're doing. Here's what we were trying to do. Here's what the steps we're going to take. That reminds me, I got to tell you a quick COVID story, which was really challenging for me at the time. When we did COVID, so to answer your question, frustrated, anger, shock. But because we were so transparent about what was going on and what we were doing and how we were trying to fix it, it then settled in and said, this is what it is. I mean, what else can these guys do?
I was going to say, you had something to point to. This is the reason, whether it was COVID or whatever. We had an experience. We'll come back. I don't want to forget your story, but in 2019, we had kind of a confluence of events. Company did not have its best year. We could sense the market was changing, not a dramatic change, but you could tell it had started going the wrong direction. And our investors wanted to sell the company, which meant we had to start structuring it for a sale. And so we were forced to part ways with half of our management team to deal with those three situations. And so that was not as clear. And these are people I had worked with 7 years, 10 years. I mean, they got us to that point. And the company, the business just could not afford to continue with that structure. So those were really difficult conversations because there wasn't one thing we could say, hey, well, the world's falling apart. Obviously we can't continue this way. It was more nuanced, and that made it tough.
I would say the other thing too is in helping the overall situation is I always find it like do skip level meetings, talk to small groups of employees. I mean, yes, you're going to do a blanket wide, all wide email, all wide calls, but I started to have skip level smaller groups of employees and allow them to ask me questions. Cause then people would feel more comfortable. Like, okay, he's opening up.
I have access
he's sharing what's going on. He's being honest. And, I think that helps out a lot. I think you have to just be prepared to, pull the curtain back and say, hey, this is what's going on. How would you handle it? And I actually, even when we make smaller decisions on things, I say, you're CEO for the day.
Mm-hmm.
What would you do if an employee was doing this over and over again? How would you handle it? And it's interesting because when they get put on the spot and have to make those decisions,
a business decision.
It's difficult. So I just think being transparent, communication, which we talked about in previous.
Well, I love that, and we'll get to your story now. I love the do it all at once. You think even financially, but so many psychological components to that. That's a great tip because employees aren't anticipating what's the next cut. It's all get it done, and then you're all pointing towards the same goal. I never thought of that.
That was a big learning for me because that's not my natural way of approaching things. But
I'm going to get to that later. All right, COVID story first. So I was
just going to say during COVID, what was really difficult for me at the time was we had to make the decision to close the business, and
that's a tough decision.
Well, we had to close for a month.
Yeah.
But what was really interesting during that time frame was that I had a group of employees that could not believe we were closing. It was like our kids on the spectrum that
it seemed
help.
like an essential service.
They need to be in their therapy or they're going to regress. And those employees were emailing me, calling me on the side. Then I had another group of employees that said, I cannot believe that you are thinking about reopening.
Oh, yeah.
Because you're putting everyone in danger from this, national disaster, this worldwide epidemic, and you're putting us at risk. I had a group of clients emailing and calling me saying, you are fantastic for opening the business and getting our kids back in because we're at a loss. We're working and now we don't know what to do with our children who are typically at your center, in daycare, whatever. You're opening, that's helping us because our jobs don't allow for us to do this. So thank you for opening. We appreciate it. And then there were the clients that said, you're insane. Can't believe you're opening. I don't know what you're doing. I had 4 different groups of people coming at me, positive and negative, and the toll it took just every day being like, you're not going to please everybody. The decisions you're going to have to make are going to be really challenging, but you ultimately get to a point where you're at peace with like, well, this is the decision we have to make.
Move forward.
We have to do it, right? And so pause, evaluate, take a calm approach, because there's going to be people that are going to be there's furious with you, and there's going to be people that will be happy with you, but then execute, come up with a plan quickly and execute. And so,
and don't.
Can you touch on briefly? I think this is such a great story. When we shut down for that 1 month, let's say it was on the 15th, you were literally in the middle of changing buildings. How many square foot is?
That's 16,000 square feet.
And realized that, let's say it was the 15th, we shut down, that we weren't going to be in when the lease was over. And that day after the 4:00 phone call,
it hit me that
we're
day.
shutting down.
Right.
All hands on deck. We were calling friends, and we all moved an entire center. They allowed us to have the other space for employees. That day had to be the entire center from scratch, had to be completely moved out. All toys, playground torn down.
Yeah, that was
crazy.
One of the craziest days
during
I've ever had it by
COVID, while
yourself.
we closed, the lease was expiring.
Yeah,
we were out, and it hit me the day.
But wait, did you guys know you were going to be closed for a month?
No, but we knew that. But we didn't. We knew we were going to be closed indefinitely
for some amount. Yeah,
and the lease was going to expire. Somebody brought up to me that the lease was expiring in the next week. So on our call, closing the business, I asked for kind of all hands to help us move 16,000 square feet
You're like
of
that
space.
guy in college who calls, "Hey, moving this afternoon?
Yeah.
Could you
no,
come?"
actually,
every file cabinet, every toy, everything had to be put into another.
No, kudos to Michelle Gutierrez out there. Michelle was one of our senior leaders that was responsible for getting us moved. And I mean, she literally called like 8 guys in a truck, and they all just came and started moving things and
disassembled one of those, rainbow playgrounds that we had
I've
indoors.
saw that.
everything had to be moved from 10,000 square feet of space into another 10,000 square feet of space within probably 8 hours while employees were there. And so everything got picked up and moved, and
pizzas being ordered. I mean, we were there till 2 a.m. It was the craziest whirlwind of a 24-hour period I've ever experienced.
But it's going to show you when you got to act fast. And that's one of those ones like, okay, we have to come up with a plan. The plan didn't have weeks or days, it had hours. And then it was, we have to put this together. So the thing too, we should take away from this session is like, it's not a question of if you're going to deal with a disaster or something that takes you off the rails. It's when it's going to happen. Something will happen. I don't want to sound like a negative nanny here, but the reality is that something's going to happen that's going to throw you off your game.
Are you, speaking of that, are you still an optimist? Has it changed you? Not personally.
That's interesting.
Not personally, but like business-wise. You said, I'm always an optimist thinking things are going to turn out for the better. Are you still that way?
I'm still very optimistic, but when it comes to business, I'm more realistic now.
Okay.
And I understand it's different than being an optimist.
So you're not this, you have changed.
No, I haven't changed my personality, my outlook on life and, things like that. But when it comes to business, I'm more of a realist in situations like this. And I was thinking when Brad was talking, two different types of disasters there. I'm assuming the insurance rates getting cut was a risk you probably identified in your business plan. COVID, I don't think anybody had in their business plan. Like, so there's some risks that you talk about up front, like, hey, this could happen someday. Our phone system could go down. Our office could, be shut down by weather, flood, fire, earthquake, something like that. We could lose a big customer, which, I'll talk about. Those are different. Like if you've already talked about it in the past, maybe you even have a contingency plan where it's not as much of a shock to the system. Like, okay, we knew this could happen. It did. Whereas a COVID, like,
Yeah, no, I agree with you on that. I think the rate cut was so significant.
Well, the size of it was
it was almost like
somebody cut 50%.
It was not like, hey, a big wave is coming into the shore. It was like a massive tidal wave 5 times the size of anything you've ever seen is coming in, and you have no time to react. And that was what caught us off guard. It's like you always plan for, okay, what if this happens or this happens? This was so big. This was like so earth shattering to us that we were literally floored, going like, I didn't even think that was possible. Like, who do we contact about that? Who do we even talk to? Because that will just put our business underwater. But we persevered. That was 8 years ago. So we actually put a plan in place.
I can't believe that was 8 years already.
How did
we made an adjustment?
And I know there's just so many interesting points here. So that was industry wide. So
Yes.
how did you figure out what other companies were doing? You isolated, you didn't care.
That's a good question.
No, I think it's from my prior experiences of working for an individual that I have a lot of respect for. Named by the name Stephen Moskowitz, a great guy. He taught a lot about P&L management and things that changes in updates and things that you'll have to do within a business that potentially, changes you have to make kind of on the spot, things you have to do, things you have to look for. But from our standpoint, we made a move very quickly about what is our future organization going to look like at this new reimbursement, this type of revenue. And you start to see, like, if all things were equal, this many hours are being delivered at this type of reimbursement, we can only carry so much expense against that revenue, or else the business doesn't survive. So right away you start thinking, okay, I have this much revenue coming in now versus this. So you have this much revenue coming in, you are carrying this much expense. How do you get your expense down to X, Y, or Z? And now the team gets together and says, how are we going to lose X revenue, or sorry, X expense in the process? Because if we don't survive. And the quicker we do it, the better. That's when we started to identify what was headcount that needed to go? What do we do with our vendors? What do we do with our leases? It was everything. And
So competitors are relevant because you're on your own track.
yeah, this has nothing to do. This has nothing to do with competitors. This has to do with like, okay, this is survival. You're going to have to make changes within your business model. And we did it very quickly. We made moves very quickly. And that's, I think, when you guys asked earlier about, well, how did the employees take it? That was the shock, because we moved so quickly on it after we made the decisions that people were like, well, my God, I'm losing my job. And these people are getting, everybody across the board, pay cuts. I mean, it was like massive. And so, yeah, and it was it was 8 years ago, and that still sticks in my head today.
Brian, I know we haven't even got to your sheet yet, and I want to get to some stories, but we just did a episode on investors, right? So I'm thinking of the person out there trying to start a business, find that relationship, cultivate that relationship with investors. What did your investors say? Were they like, yep, okay, this
Good
happens?
luck. No. They
how
said,
did they take it, or how did you approach it
I think the same way I did.
to cultivate that relationship?
I think the same way that I did, which was we were just very transparent and said, this is what this is going to look like. This is the steps we're going to take. I think they just want to know, like, do you have a plan? Is the plan that you're implementing going to get us back to at least level ground so we can ride this out, or we can persevere through this? So tell us, kind of generally speaking, what's your plan? And I think they just wanted to hear as a board that, like, okay,
we have a plan.
His plan is comprehensive. It's thoughtful. It's going to address the problems. It's not like
they're not ignoring the problem.
They're not ignoring the problem. Or, hey, much like what Brian was saying earlier, hey, you can't just make some little cuts. That's not going to do it. That's not going to get what you're missing out on this. So, or what you're losing. So what is your plan? And so that was something they required from me. But then again, they were very supportive. They knew our backs were against the wall. We had to come up with a plan. And
Right, I'll ask you the same question, because I believe you dealt more with banks, right? Did you have angel investors at this point? Let's
we
go
had
through the one
investors
that
from day
you were
one.
still a year. So that was the first one, right? That was the .com bust.
In 2000, yeah, we had investors at the point.
What did you message
we met with
investors?
them to get their input and make a decision. Do we shut down the business, or are we going to go for this? And a lot of it was like what Brad talked about. We did the math. Like, okay, let's do the numbers. It always comes down to the numbers, in terms of money. Do we have enough runway? Are we going to need more money? Are we just wishful thinking that, this? And so you do a good, better, best scenario. You do like, hey, this is best case, this is worst case. And then at the end of the day, you just look each other in the eye and go, are we in this together? Aren't we? We had investors who were great about, hey, once we're in the boat together. Like, this thing starts going down, like, we're not bailing out.
So you're not pitching them like, I got to make this thing look great. You're saying this is what it looks like.
Oh yeah, you gotta be.
Yeah, they don't want anything through rose-colored glasses. They just like, what's the likelihood probability of this, that we can actually get through this, and what's your plan? And does your plan address what we're actually going to fall back on? And do you think we can survive and grow? And they want to hear from their leader that's running the company, their CEO, that like, no, we got this. We have a plan. We're going to bounce. We're going to get through it. Need your support. Your support's been there. Fantastic. But
so for brand new entrepreneurs, don't get cute on this. Say it as it is to your investors.
Yeah. And it's part of the reality of it. There's obviously a decision on their part, but from a practical standpoint, hey, I had an investor say, if you're going to need money, the more in advance I can know, the better. Like, if you call me on a Friday and say you need $100,000, I don't have it laying around. I got to move funds around. We got to do wire transfers. We got to do bank things. I've got to make decisions. If you tell me 30 days in advance, there's a risk we could run short on payroll at the end of the month. At least then I have some time to ask questions, make decisions, so more transparent the earlier on. In a disaster, everybody realizes, okay, he didn't know this was coming. They didn't know this was coming.
And the same message in 2007, 2008 with the real estate crash, that same message to investors,
That was more them telling me, hey, we've seen things like this before.
Yeah.
You need to
start
faster.
Giddy up with your plan.
Make bigger decisions. That was where I really learned the lesson. Like, if you don't do this, because you asked a great question about competitors.
Yeah.
Our competitors took different approaches in 2008. And a lot of them panicked and started, like, our strategy was always, we were going to be the high-end provider. We were not the cheapest. We were actually, there was a premium to use VHT Studios. Well, after the market crashed, all our competitors started doing 2-for-1 sales, 3-for-1 sales, cut our price by 50%. And we're like, we're not going there. That is completely contrary to our strategy and how we've built this company where we want to go. When we came out of it in 2013, we were one of the only ones left.
Wow.
Most of them had disappeared. The ones who were still around, we changed our strategy from organic growth to acquisitions. We started acquiring the competitors that had survived because a lot of them didn't want to go through it again. They're like, I'm never going to do this again. Now that I survived, how do I get to safe harbor, sell my business to VHT and let Brian worry about it?
Yeah.
And we built some great relationships that way. We, big part of our company was people that, came on to VHT, brought their company with after that crisis.
I'm getting a stomach ache thinking of all these disasters.
Disasters
it may have been all this pineapple juice I had with the Tito's.
The all-nighter.
It could be the all-nighter. It could have been the pineapple.
I do have one
vodka.
more I want to share before we leave.
No, let's do. Amber, we got time. We got time there, Amber. We got one more story that we want to.
Yeah,
this
please.
is definitely going to be. I'm already right now. This is definitely going to be another episode. I mean, there are so many great things to talk about.
Yeah, there was a few things that I didn't even talk that were disasters for us that I think would be entrepreneurs and business owners would be like, okay, that's interesting. I'd like to learn more about how you maneuvered through that.
Well, we gave you 3 movies to watch. That's
true.
Big Short,
The
Margin
Martian.
Call, and
Amber,
The
you like The
Martian.
Martian?
Okay.
Do you know The Big Short? Amber, do you know that one or no?
Which one?
Big Short. You ever heard that movie?
I do not.
So
Okay.
good.
That's on your list.
Watch it. It's
Created
awesome.
so way that everyone can.
Very cool.
All right, so a disaster story.
So you had asked about vendors, and I think disasters really separate the good vendors, partners, business partners from the not so good partners. It's the same thing with customers. Like one of our biggest disasters I mentioned early on was a customer who went bankrupt. They were one of our top 3 customers, one of my favorite customers, not just because they were in Las Vegas.
Oh, man.
But we had a good...
Because they were in Vegas.
Right.
Not just
They were in Vegas.
Had to
it
visit
was
them.
one, but not just
I
because.
visit them often, much more often than the customer in Detroit. But
Oh, okay. Well, thanks, Detroit. Yeah.
So
thanks
for any potential
thanks for the
investors
live
in
remote to
Detroit.
Detroit.
yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
we're gonna have to go
Domino's
with
Pizza,
it.
it's done, out.
Okay, so we've just insulted. I think we'll get to the scorecard probably in our next episode, but.
But the principal, the founder of this company was my age. He was really successful. We had a lot of great conversations. He was on a roll. He had, licensed a national brand. So he was part of a national brand. And, when 2007, 2008 hit, you could tell their business was struggling a little bit and the AR started slowing down. They weren't paying their bills as quickly, which one piece of advice I'd give everybody, if it's your company, watch the AR weekly. Don't just leave it up to your accountant. Don't just leave it up to someone else, because if someone starts slow paying their bills, there's a reason for it.
That would be accounts receivable for you people at home.
Yeah, if you're billing people, even if they're paying on credit card and something slows down, that's a red flag. And this was a big one. This was, like our 3rd largest customer. They were spending millions of dollars a year with us. And so I would call and say, hey.
Was there, Brian, were they going out from like 30 to 40 to 50 days out?
30, all of a sudden it's like they're 2 months behind. We've got 2 invoices unpaid. And so I would call and they would say, well, what's going on in the economy, but don't worry about it. We're growing so fast. We just brought on some new investors. Be like, all right, it's a big client and I've got a good relationship with them. Then it got to 90 days and 3 invoices are outstanding and they owe us almost $500,000. And then I get a letter in the mail from their law firm, says they're declaring bankruptcy and all that money's gone.
Was that the day of the VHT picnic?
Right. It usually was. Usually I would get that kind of news the day the company's having a big party, big Christmas party or a Labor Day party.
That's why to this day, Brian will still not go to a picnic. Doesn't matter what kind, children's picnic.
We thought he was allergic to bees.
No,
right, I'm
but
just
now we're
asking
finding
for
out
bad
it's
news.
not allergic to bees.
So, this wound up being a double whammy. Not only did we lose one of our biggest customers, they stiffed us on $500,000. Like, that's a shock to the system.
Yeah.
It
is.
that you have to deal with that no one in the company's prepared for. And it was personally disappointing to me because, there was a little bit of trust there. Like, okay.
You felt like he would have came out and said, Brian, just so you know.
Right.
Prepare.
And we actually had a candid conversation afterwards. I won't use his real name. I said, hey, Jim, what the F? And he's like, Brian, this has been a horrible situation for me. And I said, I've been there, short of cash and having to talk to investors. And he said, this totally caught me off guard. We had brought in a secondary provider of funding because they were growing. They were growing like a bee. I mean, they were a great customer for us because they were growing. He said the secondary sold our note to someone else. I didn't know it. The group they sold it to called us on a ticky-tack covenant and called the loan in. And we didn't have the money.
Wow.
He said the business was great. I just got screwed on a financing deal.
Wow.
And so we were the victims of it. And
how upset was your board that did they give you any grief about how did you not know or how did you not see this coming, or could we have done anything in advance, or was it like trust where you're like,
yeah, they knew the AR because I would point it out, so I red flagged it. Hey, this might be an issue, this customer, but I've talked to Mark. He's made assurances. And when it happened, I think they all said, I've been through similar things where somebody, not necessarily lied, but did what they had to do for the business, which is to me, a huge issue for founders and CEOs and people who own businesses. There's a gray line on, kind of morals and values and things like that you've got to make a personal decision on. Like, hey, this is what's in the best interest of my business. It's going to hurt some other people that I have relationships with, I have friends with, but what can I do? I can't. I mean, legally,
you're saying he probably should have told you something, but for the good of his own business, he's like, I don't know if I could share that with Brian or any other vendors. What's going on in my business right now?
Right, because then he's going to wind up getting sued afterwards for giving information to one vendor over another vendor. It's just a messy thing when stuff like that happens. And we've been through lawsuits where you hear it all the time in the press. I can't speak about it because it's a current. Bankruptcy is kind of the same thing. I can't give you advance warning that I'm going bankrupt. Or I mean, literally, you can't even pay. Once it's apparent you're going to file for bankruptcy, you can't pay somebody because the government will force them to give that money back.
Wow.
They'll be like, okay, let's go back 90 days. Any payments you made, they need to be recovered so that all the debt holders can be treated equally. It's a messy thing. So that's definitely a disaster that taught me a lot just about your relationships with vendors, customers, and how they can impact the business. And
well, you survived. I mean, you came out on the other end. I mean, it's probably a rough ride. I mean, what I would take from all this is that it's gonna something will hit. If you don't think something's gonna hurt or hit or derail your business at some point or another, you're naive, because it will happen. Whether it's earth shattering, whether it's business destroying, there's gonna be something that's gonna could take you off the rails, and
usually during a company picnic.
But how you react to it is really important. Yes. So I mean, what I would really drive home in this is that when that happens, you gotta stay calm.
Yeah.
How you approach it. Was that?
Be a leader.
Be a leader. Yeah, I'd say calm and confident, right? Be confident in the decisions you make going forward. Be calm in your approach, because anything other than that will resonate in your environment around you, and you don't want that. I would also say that, pause briefly, evaluate what's going on. Don't make too quick of an impulsive decision. But once you do make that decision and you've got all your info and you've made a decision, be definitive and be fast. Like, do it. Don't wait, because those are the things that could be the difference between your business surviving and not surviving, or growing or not growing. So
do it all at once if you can, for many reasons. That's a great tip there.
Yeah.
Be straight shooter with your investors.
Yep.
Not rose-colored glasses.
Yeah. And maybe we'll share some more
we're
disasters along the way.
Definitely going to continue this topic, because we didn't even get into should I end it with an ASMR? We didn't even get into all your.
Wait, he's got 14 on that sheet.
I know,
I'd like to hear some of those because I know my brother pretty well, and I think he shared probably about 3 or 4, but maybe the other.
We will
11.
get to those later. And for those who are watching us on YouTube or Spotify, Brian, you had a funny story. You said someone who's watching, and they're like, "Oh yeah, I was in the car or something." You're like,
watching in the car while they were driving.
We are on Spotify. We're on Amazon Music. We're on Apple. So if you're listening to us, go to YouTube and Spotify. Watch us. And if you're watching to us, go listen to us on anywhere you get your podcast. And please reach out with emails. We'd love to respond. We'd love to see your feedback. And let's get some sleep. So until next time,
good time.
we'll see you then. Thanks for joining, everyone.
The morning
Well done.
after hours.
Well done after hours. Okay.